Right. Okay, it's Aiden Fly
Um,
and Bettina Fields. And we're here with Dharman Rice of the Zen Center in Shelburne, Vermont. Would you start with a question?
yeah, sure. So what are like the general daily kind of struggles and stuff that you have to go through as a Buddhist?
Well, as I said, there are only two people who are resident here, and they both work, so they get up and go to work like other people who work. In terms of those of us who practice here, we do a lot of sitting. We come here, some of us, 2-3 times a week to do an hour and a half or hour and three-quarters worth of sitting. But we also teach or are engineers or doctors or whatever, and we have our daily lives. Many have children. So the big struggle for us, for all of us who practice Zen Buddhism, is not only what we do on the mat and what we do with our teacher in private instruction, but if we manage to have some sort of awareness, finally, there's always the question of how you integrate that into your daily life. And that practice just goes on and on. I mean, if you have a great awakening such as the Buddha had, and you go home and kick your dog and scream at your spouse, what's the point? I mean, it doesn't have a point if we don't integrate it into our everyday life. So that's the problem of everyday life, is trying to bring our practice to our everyday life, so that we bring the kind of realization and self-control that we manage when we're sitting by ourselves looking at a wall. I mean, it's easy to have the milk and honey running in your veins when you're sitting on a mountaintop just meditating by yourself. It's harder when you get a flat tire on the way to work, or the kids are screaming or throwing milk across the kitchen or whatever. That's the struggle, and those are just ordinary. It's just ordinary stuff. How do we integrate what we practice on the mat into just ordinary life, just ordinary everyday life that everybody's aware of, and that we all have to deal with that stuff.
One question I had for you is that I've read that Zen Buddhism kind of teaches people that everyone has the potential to reach enlightenment. So how would you reach enlightenment? How does one go about doing that?
When the Buddha, the story, I don't know how familiar you may be with the story of the Buddha's life, but if you remember hearing anything about it, there's a great a documentary that PBS made about the Buddha's life, which is interesting to watch if you ever have a chance. But in the story about the Buddha's awakening, he went through a number of trials and took a long time, 6 years of sitting, and indeed, according to legend, many lifetimes before that. And what he realized when he finally had this great awakening experience, he looked up at Venus in the morning sky, and is reputed to have said, "Wonder of wonders, from the beginning all beings are Buddha, full of wisdom and virtue." All beings are awake, in other words. Well, the obvious question for all of us is, if we're all Buddha already, how come we're not? I don't feel like Buddha, and mostly I don't act like Buddha. And why is that? And that's sort of what our practice is about. If, as the Buddha said, we're already awake, why do we have to work so hard at realizing that we're already awake, and that we're already full of wisdom and compassion? I mean, religions usually start out with the assumption that people are evil and they've fallen away from God and have to somehow get back in touch with God. So you start out with the fact that people are by nature evil, and you have to explain the good that they do. Or, like Buddhism, you start out with the fact, or the assumption, that people are already Buddha, full of wisdom and compassion. Well then, how come there's so much evil in the world? So, you, in a way, you sort of pick your choice, which you're going to try to explain. And Buddhists, we don't believe that people are naturally evil. We believe that they're naturally good. Well, if
Right.
I'm naturally good, how come I do scream at my spouse or kick my dog or whatever nasty things that I might do, or that any of us might do, or yell at people in traffic, have experienced road rage, or want to get out of the car and punch somebody out or something, whatever. So how do we come to realize our Buddhahood? Well, that's what we come and do sessions for, retreats for, meet with our teacher. We have practices in which we learn how to meditate, and what we're trying to do, just to sort of make it as simple as possible, is to learn how to pay attention to what's happening. There was a great Zen master named Ikkyu in the 17th century in Japan, who was once asked to write down some sayings of the highest wisdom, and he picked up his calligraphy brush. He was a calligrapher too, and he wrote down just one word: attention. And the man looked at it and he said, "That's it? You can't, won't you expand a little bit?" And so he picked up his brush and he wrote, "Attention, attention." And the man looked at it and he said, "Well, I don't see anything very profound or subtle about that." So EQ picked up his brush and he wrote, "Attention, attention, attention." And the guy looked at it, and by this time he was pretty irked, and he said, "Well, what does this word attention mean anyway?" And EQ said, "Attention means attention." In other words, just pay attention. And if you learn how to pay attention, your life will be transformed. And
Wow.
that is the case. That really is. If you think it's easy to pay attention, try counting your breath from 1 to 10 inhalations and exhalations for 30 minutes straight. It sounds simple. It is simple, but it isn't easy. Because our minds are so distracted, you might find yourself counting to 3 15 times, or before you know it, you're counting 19, 20, and so on. But why do that? Well, partly as a way of learning how to pay attention, learning how to stop being so distracted by all of the things that we get distracted by. And when we can learn how to pay attention, we are closer to realizing what we are already, namely wise and compassionate. So that's still, that's the goal, to realize who we already are. Well, what does that mean? Part of what it means is that is so close to us, we can't focus on it. We can't see it because it's right up against our nose, who we really are. We just, in a way, Zen Buddhism and all forms of Buddhism, in a way, are not so much what you're going to get out of it, but what you're going to drop out of it, and what you're going to let go of. What we're trying to do is to let go of a lot of stuff that gets in the way.
Wow. So
Simple,
in your
but not easy.
Okay. So it's like a process.
It's a process for sure, and it isn't maybe just even about what we're going to do here, but maybe in some other form too. Anyway, no matter how long we've done it, there's still more to do.
So what in your personal experience kind of made you want to start Zen Buddhism? What was it for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. That is maybe the best question. Well, I came to Buddhism because I was a very unhappy, very angry guy. Most people who come to Buddhist practice are suffering in one way or another. And in fact, the Buddha's Four Noble Truths, the first noble truth is that there is suffering. And then he talks about the causes of suffering and how we can get rid of suffering and a specific way to do that. Most people don't sit in front of walls for 10 or 12 hours a day if they're feeling hunky-dory about things. They're feeling tremendously happy, unless they started off feeling unhappy and realized that they could get over their unhappiness by meditating. But I came because I I was unhappy about various things that happened to me in my life. I had a career teaching at UPM, and I was very involved in the anti-war movement in Vietnam days, and got fired from my job at UPM because I was, being arrested, and this was conduct on becoming a professor, and blah blah blah. And that cost me my career for a number of years, and it cost me my first marriage, and I gave myself 6 months I was a young kid, and I gave myself 6 months to get over that. Well, a decade later, I realized that I was still pretty pissed off about it, and I had a lot of therapy, and luckily some of my therapists realized that I had an affinity for Buddhism, because I'm embarrassed to say now, I was a philosophy teacher, and I had talked about Buddhism before I'd ever practiced it. I am embarrassed now to say. But that, getting over that, letting go of that anger was why I came to Buddhism in the beginning, and that story is pretty typical. I mean, typical in the sense that everybody was carrying some kind of baggage, some kind of hurt, some kind of suffering. There are a lot of happy people here now, but in the beginning, sometimes they play at it, but they're not, if you scratch them a little bit, they're not so happy.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this interview. Again, we're here with Mr. Dharman Rice of the Zen Buddhism Center in Shelburne, Vermont.